Thank you all for joining me on my Instagram Live. I am just going to invite my guest. Okay, great. So while we wait for my guest to join us, I'm just going to chat with you guys a little bit about why I decided to do this Instagram Live today. Bear with me. Hopefully, technology cooperates with me while I wait for my guest to join us here on this Instagram Live. Okay, so for those of you who follow me, you might have seen my reel a couple of weeks ago. Actually, I think it was last week, talking about the false reports of ICE raids that were happening at Gurdwara. As some of you know, that I am pretty well connected within the Sikh community here in the tri-state area. And I reached out to Gurdwara or houses of worship here in New Jersey, and they told me that obviously these raids haven't happened, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a possibility. Okay, my guest just joined us, so let's merge. Come on. Great, here we go. Awesome. Technology is cooperating with us. So, yes, my guest is the Sikh Coalition. And just before you guys joined our call, I was talking about that reel that I did with you all last week. And so, the purpose of that reel was to obviously inform you all that these ICE raids that people claimed were happening at Gurdwara or Sikh House of Worship across New Jersey, New York, that wasn't the case. So, that was false reporting. But these raids could very well happen, especially after security protections have been rolled back with this new administration. So I talked to the Sikh Coalition as well as SALDEF, and Sikh Coalition mentioned that they would be putting together Know Your Rights resources for the Sangat across the nation in case these raids were to happen. So they have put these resources together, and we thought that, we could do a reel, we could do a quick video, but this is a lot of information to go through. So we thought that this live call would be probably the best bet for us to go through all this extensive information. And it also gives you all a chance, around the world to ask your questions to the experts as all this is kind of changing in real time. So without further ado, I am joined by the Executive Director of Sikh Coalition, Harman Singh, the Managing Director of Education and Community Development, Rucha Kaur, and Sahil Kaur, the Senior Staff Attorney. Thank you all so much for joining me. I know you have a packed couple of days that you've been going through, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you for the invite. We really appreciate it.
Of course. So let's kind of just get right into it. I haven't heard any credible reports that Gurdwara have been raided by ICE in the New Jersey, New York, Connecticut region. Have you heard anything?
No, so we don't have any verified reports of ICE coming to any of the Gurdwaras in New York or New Jersey. However, there are two things that I would like to point out. As you said, or as you were saying, right, as we joined, the possibility exists of them coming because the protections that were in place are no longer in place. So that possibility definitely exists. And the speed with which this news spread throughout the community means that the community is also kind of on edge about this news and how this is kind of going all over our Sangat. So really now is the time that we really pay attention to what we're hearing, the information that we're getting, and also start preparing in case something does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. To be prepared is probably the best option, right? And approach Gurdwara, and I know it's very differently if Gurdwara is open and if Gurdwara is closed. So how about you go through that first? Let's say Gurdwara is open and ICE agents do come to our house of worship.
Yeah, I mean, Jyoti, I think the biggest thing which you hit on is that we want to start with just a disclaimer here that I think is really important for Sanghas to recognize, which is this is an evolving and nuanced situation, right? There's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all piece of advice that we can give that can best protect all Gurdwaras from all situations that could occur. And so it's important to kind of consider the nuance in terms of whether a Gurdwara is open, whether it's closed. Obviously as Sikhs, we view Gurdwaras as always being open in terms of welcoming for anyone of any background to come and, be in Sangat and to partake in Langar and to find solace and community. And at the same time, legally, we have to consider what does open and closed mean within Gurdwara spaces. And so the reason we put out that Know Your Rights resources about Gurdwara and about individuals as well, and the reason it may appear so long to so many folks is because this isn't something that can necessarily be explained in a 30-second sound clip. It does require a bit of conversation to kind of parse through what the situation might be for your particular Gurdwara. But even with all of that kind of background, I think there's some basic things that are generally true across all situations that we would start as basic recommendations for folks if ICE were to enter your open Gurdwara. So the first thing we would say is always ask ICE for identification. So if someone is coming into your Gurdwara space and is asking about folks' immigration status or asking about specific things that are well beyond normal conversation that any individual should be having, you should always ask them for identification. And you can quite simply say, just please ask, please show me your identification to verify you're a member of law enforcement. That's a baseline starting point, is just to ask that question. If ICE refuses to show you their identification, you don't have to engage and you can actually ask them to leave. So if they're not showing their ID, at that point, you should walk away and you should ask them to leave, and you should encourage other Sangat members to not engage as well. If ICE shows you their identification, the next step would be to ask them if they have a judicial warrant. My colleague Sahil can kind of expand on this. There is a difference between judicial and administrative warrants. On our resources, you can kind of get more context on what the difference is. But simply put, a judicial warrant is a warrant signed by a judge. So you want to confirm that they actually have a warrant signed by a judge to be at the Gurdwara. If ICE does not have a valid warrant, you can again ask them to leave. Now, what I'll say here is asking ICE to leave does not necessarily mean they will actually leave, right? So what happens in terms of the best practices Sangat members can do versus what ICE may actually do in practice might be two different things. So just because you ask ICE to leave or law enforcement to leave because they either don't show identification or don't have a judicial warrant does not necessarily mean that they will immediately exit the Gurdwara space. But it's still a best practice to ask.
I'm going to stop you there. Can you talk about what is a judicial warrant for someone who might not know what it looks like? Where does it have to be signed? What logos does it have to have on it? Just go through that information.
Yeah. Sahil, did you want to touch on that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. As Harman mentioned, it's a warrant that's signed by a federal or state court judge. And comparing that to an administrative warrant, so an administrative warrant might also be signed by a judge, but it would be signed by an immigration judge. And now the thing that you can look out for to distinguish between the two is that an administrative warrant will say U.S. Department of Homeland Security at the top, whereas a judicial warrant will say it'll mention the court that the judge sits within. So that's your kind of the clearest way that you'll be able to distinguish between the two. And ICE agents, they might come to you with an administrative warrant, but that will not allow them to enter the Gurdwara to search the space. They would need a judicial warrant to do that.
Okay. And I see some questions are coming in real time, so I'm going to try to get to those as well. That was really helpful information, Sahil, because, someone can hand you a piece of paper and it's like, you might think it's a warrant, but it's very important for us to distinguish what it needs to be signed. It has to have certain logos, it has to be signed, by a judge within your state, I believe, as well, or within your county. So these are very important distinctions to make, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a question someone is asking, can the Department of Homeland Security also investigate, or any other agency, or is it just ICE that is investigating? Do you guys want to take that? So I believe that it is ICE. If you want to chime in, you guys can, but I believe that it's just ICE that we're talking about, which falls under the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, so ICE would fall under the Department of Homeland Security. I think we have heard, correct me if I'm wrong, law enforcement may accompany ICE in some ways as well. So there could be a dual situation where law enforcement is also with ICE taking part in such raids.
Okay, great. So can you distinguish for us what it means for the Gurdwara to be open versus what it means for the Gurdwara to be closed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think in general, one of the things to keep in mind is that even within a Gurdwara space, things could be open and closed. And what we mean by that is typically the Van halls, Langar halls are considered open public spaces. In most cases, there's not necessarily anyone at the door checking who is or is not coming into the Divan Hall or Langar Hall or maybe the lobby area. There could be private spaces within a Gurdwara. Those could be back offices with paperwork that the Gurdwara uses if there's like a Gurdwara president or committees meet back there. That could be a private space if there's a Bhai Sahib or a Granthi who lives at the Gurdwara. That could be considered a private space. So it's partially dependent on what part of the Gurdwara you're referring to. One of the best practices we've recommended to Gurdwaras is for areas you want to mark as private, put up a sign that says private, right? So if you have a back office that you know contains important paperwork and documentation about the Gurdwara, it would be a good sign to put up a private sign right outside the back office. Same could be said for other areas that you want to mark within the Gurdwara property that is a private space. The part, again, where this gets nuanced is depending maybe on the time of day, depending on the day of the week, a place could be considered open or public. And I'll just give you one example. You know, I know there are many Gurdwaras that might have gates to enter the parking lot, and those gates might be closed at nighttime when there may be less Sangat members who are in attendance. So at that point, is that place public or private? That might be a question legally that would have to be answered because it's not open to anyone from the public to walk in. In fact, there might be a way someone needs to buzz in, someone from the Gurdwara who's appointed to check those buzzes to see who they want to buzz in and out. That might be considered a private space. So it's partially dependent on the Gurdwara setup, the location, and then where in the Gurdwara we're talking about that's considered public or private.
Okay, good distinctions again. So let's say that ICE agents do come to the Gurdwara. Harman, you touched on this briefly earlier. Sangat people don't have to talk to these agents, right? Can you talk about, the right to remain silent?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and Sahil if you want to kind of close. I mean, the biggest thing we'll just say is if ICE visits your Gurdwara, there's 2 or 3 things that are really important for Sangat members to do. One is just stay calm. Do not run from ICE agents. Do not run from law enforcement because that will give them plenty of reason to arrest not just you, but potentially others within the Sangat as well. It's really important that Gurdwara security, if you have Gurdwara security, we know many Gurdwaras might have individuals who are assigned to a security working group, that those individuals not attempt to stop ICE from interfering with their operations because, again, if individuals do that, they could also be arrested and involved in some sort of detainment. And then part of all of this is, and this is good to know, is that you have a right to record ICE interactions at the Gurdwara. So if you are seeing and you're a bystander seeing that there is some interaction happening, it could be great for documenting purposes if you are able to record that interaction between a Sangat member and an ICE agent so that potentially if there's any legal action that needs to be taken down the road, there's some documented evidence. I think relevant to all of this is just I will always document and you can contact our team and document with us as well so we can see if we can provide some sort of support on that. But I don't know, Sal, if you want to talk just generally about the right to remain silent as practice.
Sure. I mean, it's all right there in that one phrase. Whether you're an immigrant or not, whether you are here lawfully or not, you have the right to remain silent. And that includes, if ICE is asking you questions like, what is your immigration status? Where were you born? You do not have to answer any of those questions. That's all encompassed by this right to remain silent. So take it fully literally. You do not have to say a word to an agent when you're trying to invoke that right.
And in fact, you don't have to answer anyone's questions, right? Because you might not know who it is. If they're asking about, yourself, other Sangat members, other individuals, do you have to answer those questions?
No, exactly. You said it correctly. You can refuse to answer any of their questions, regardless of who it's about, or if it's about you. You can just say, nope, I'm staying silent.
Okay, yeah. And so, what's the fastest way, to end a conversation? Like, let's say, ICE does show up. Like, what should Sangat do?
You want me to? Yeah, I mean, I think invoking that right will maybe your best bet. So if they're trying to engage with you, you can say something along the lines of, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. And at that point, they should respect that. They're supposed to respect that and then not further any conversations with you. So I would say that that's probably your best bet.
Okay. And Harman, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in general, obviously, if you have official documents or pictures of official documents, let's say you have a U.S. passport, a green card, or visa paperwork, our general recommendation is not necessarily to carry the actual legal document, maybe a picture of it. just in case, things get lost. It can be hard to replace some of them. Obviously, folks carry their legal IDs, but in cases of other documentation, the easiest way is if you have those documentations is just to show it to an ICE agent. The one thing we say is do not show ICE agents foreign passports. That could lead down a road of questioning of whether or not you are here legally and or should be here legally, et cetera. And so, again, if you have the documentation and you want to end the interaction, and this is outside of a good space as well, right? If you're just approached by an ICE agent, they identify that they're an ICE agent, they're in public, so they ask you for the paperwork. If you have it, that's the easiest way to end it. If you do not necessarily have the paperwork or you are undocumented, obviously at that point, the best legal advice would be to remain silent, to speak to a lawyer first before you divulge any additional information.
Okay, and so let's say like you have a picture of it on your cell phone, that's enough.
Yeah, that should be enough. Yeah.
Okay, and we have a question coming in from someone. Just for reference, of course, I know this, but you do have a lot of this information in Punjabi on your website as well, right?
So we have some of this information in Punjabi. Our one-page summary is on our website in Punjabi. More information, especially our longer Know Your Rights documents. We're translating them as quickly as possible, and those are coming in Punjabi very, very soon. We completely understand how important it is for Sangat to have this information in language, and so we're working very, very quickly to get this out in Punjabi. We just wanted to make sure, especially as things were evolving and changing so rapidly, we wanted to make sure that folks had information, but that is absolutely our priority, to make sure that it all is available in Punjabi. ਪਰ ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਾਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੈਪੀਲੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਡਾਕੂਮੈਂਟਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੁਐਸਚਨਸ ਨੇ, we'll do our best to answer them.
Yeah, that's really good to know, because I know there could be sometimes a language barrier, especially because we're a community of immigrants sometimes, right? So that's good to know, and I'll link to all that. I'll probably post this all on my YouTube page later on, so I will do my best to share all of your resources as well in Punjabi. Someone is saying, like, I know Harman, you touched on this a minute ago, you don't want to run, obviously, right? Just do you want to elaborate a little bit more on why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several components to it. One is obviously running. There are a host of other legal challenges that could come even outside of necessarily your immigration status, which is like evading law enforcement, et cetera. So that's one reason, is obviously there could be a whole additional set of challenges that come your way if you are running from law enforcement. I think additionally, it can set off panic and also other concerns for other Sangat members as well, who may not know what is necessarily going on. And so just generally our best practices, if they are approaching you and you are not comfortable showing documentation, it is best to remain silent and to ask to speak to a lawyer, but engaging in additional attempts to either flee the scene or escape the interaction could lead to additional concerns legally for you and for others at the Gurdwara as well.
Okay. And what should someone do in the case that they are arrested, taken into some form of custody? Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
So recognizing that would obviously be a very high stress situation, it is important to try to remember the rights that you do have even once you're detained. So we've talked about some of them: the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. I don't think we've touched upon the right to translation services, and that is a right you have as well if you're detained. If you're detained, you also have the right to make a phone call. So trying to remember those rights if you're detained. Relatedly, don't answer ICE's questions. And again, I talked about this earlier. They might ask you about your immigration status and things like that. Do not answer them, and do not sign anything without your attorney.
So you guys are providing, support in this way, but you aren't actually providing like legal advice. Can you talk to me about like what the process someone can take if they do need, let's say, translation services, or they want to hire an attorney, how they go about that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, right, the Sikh Coalition doesn't necessarily have direct immigration lawyers on staff. What we would recommend is if you email our legal team, you can email immigration@sikhcoalition.org. We certainly have a large network of Punjabi-speaking immigration attorneys within network that we may be able to refer you out to, who could potentially provide the support that's needed. So we can serve kind of as a facilitator between issues that might be coming up. And This could hold true for Gurdwara committees as well, or for individuals at Gurdwara. If you see someone in your Sangat who is being detained, we have some best practices on our Know Your Rights documents as well, where you can kind of see like where can you even look to see where they may be detained, right? You can look up on ICE's website individuals who might be detained and where they might be. And that's really important information, obviously, for families to know and for folks to know. There's also just best practices in terms of who you can reach out to, both with us, but there's also other individuals and organizations that are already providing these sorts of services, not just for the Sikh community or Punjabi community, but just in general. We have contact information for them as well, so you can reach out to them.
Okay, great. And I wanted to clarify something you said earlier. You said it is okay for Sangat to film in the Gurdwaras, like you were saying, record interactions. Is that like you can just take out your cell phone and, record interactions happening?
Yeah, you can pull out your cell phone and record interactions, and I believe that's not only at Gurdwara, but any public place you can publicly record any of those sorts of interactions. And again, the value, particularly for Sangats, might be that could be important evidence or information that could be useful for the individual who might be detained and or for the Sangat in general to identify what happened in that particular scenario.
Okay. And I have a couple more questions I want to get to, but someone is asking if you have this information, in a presentation that they can do at their Gurdwara Sahib. Is that a possibility or something you're working on?
Something we're working on. The requests have come in. Our resources went out last week, and so over the weekend we did receive multiple requests to do this at Gurdwara Sahibs, either in a presentation form or in a poster form that Gurdwara Sahibs can hang on their notice board, so on and so forth. So we just want to make sure we're just working on all of those as quickly as we can turn them out.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot changing and happening in real time. You did send out these resources, right, in an email, right? And it's a living, breathing, live Google document that you're changing in real time, right?
Yes, and we're talking to a lot of attorneys. Our attorneys and our executive director can definitely speak to that, but we spoke to multiple attorneys and multiple experts, and the scenario and generally the environment around so many of these things is so rapidly evolving. Everybody's just trying to keep up. So thank you, Joti, for an awesome reminder that whatever we have out there, that is why these are living documents, and we will keep updating. This is what we know to be the best advice right now. But all of this is subject to change as we know more, see more, and see how all of this plays out in the next few weeks and months.
Okay, great. Thank you. Something we didn't talk about are red cards, and I know that you're not specifically providing those, but do you want to go through, what red cards are, where people can find them or get access to them, and, what the purpose is?
Yeah. So red card is actually a card, and everybody has rights. All of us have our rights, and under the U.S. Constitution. So a red card is essentially a document that has some of those rights. And when you're in a situation, right, that like it's a high stress situation, if you don't remember, you're definitely in your interactions, you're simply able to hand over that card and reiterate what your rights are. Our partners, our awesome partners at Sikh Family Center are doing some of this work. And so we highly recommend that folks approach them for these red cards. And if all of that information, how to get to the Sikh Family Center and what red cards are and how they're helpful. They are in Punjabi as well. So all of this information is on Sikh Family Center's website, Instagram, but also linked via our resources.
Yeah, and like you said, Rucha, like it's a high stress situation. Yeah. So what this card does is it kind of it provides you with the language of what you would say if the words kind of fail you in that situation, right?
Yeah, and it can. Right, it is a high stress situation. It's not always possible to remember, but if you have this card, you're just able to hand it over to whoever you're interacting with.
Okay. And I don't have the answer to this question. Someone is asking if maybe you have the answer. And if we don't, we apologize. This is all again changing very rapidly. Someone is asking, are they going after people who have already filed for asylum? I don't have the answer because at this point everything is rapidly changing. I don't necessarily know that they're going after this specifically. Do you guys have an answer?
I don't know that we can definitively
Yeah.
answer that. As you said, right, there's a lot of reports coming in. Some are conflicting. Some, obviously, we would want to vet before we say that. So I don't know that we can answer that conclusively.
Yeah. Okay. You talked a little while ago about, gates and labeling areas specifically in Gurdwara as private. Are there any other security measures that you wanted to put in place, or any, pointers that Gurdwara or Gurdwara leadership can, put into place?
Absolutely. I think now more than ever, it would be great for leadership at Gurdwara Sabs, for committee members, trustees, boards, whoever is making these decisions to really come together and make a plan, whether that's appointing someone who is taking a lead on immigration issues, and that means keeping up with what's going on, and making sure that they serve as a primary point person, discussing these concerns with others, so on and so forth. Physical security enhancements, cameras, doors, locks, right? And Gurdwaras are meant to be open spaces, right? It's meant for everybody to come, and we never want to take that away. However, at certain times, if those physical enhancements can be either upgraded or improved, that can help with generally just Sangat feeling safe and feeling like they're able to come. Like Harman said, just marking some spaces as being private, that can go a long way. And um, I think it's really important that not just a few in leadership, but that we are really all talking about this as a Sangat, that we are having this conversation about what our rights are, what our fellow Sangat members' rights are, right? How we are all coming together as a Sangat at this time. I think that's really important. So how are we prioritizing this in our Sunday programs or our Friday divans? I think that's really important right
So
now.
do you encourage, leadership to maybe have these conversations over the weekend or whenever there's like a program at the Gurdwara to kind of, field these questions from Sangat and, just generally have open conversations?
Absolutely. And if that means they would like to, as our resources come out, if they would like to put them up at Gurdwara on notice boards and so on, whether that's having these conversations during Divan, whether it's a presentation, or whether it's, having resources available at the Gurdwara for whoever needs it. I think yes, those conversations over the next weeks, months, I think those are really important for all of us to have together.
Okay, great. Those are the only questions that I had. Like I mentioned, for those of you who've kind of been joining us, they're coming in and out. We originally were thinking about doing a reel, but because of this is a lot of information, we thought it would be better to kind of sit down and have, a long form conversation about all of these details. We talked a little bit about, what Sangat should do if ICE were to approach the Gurdwara, what kind of warrant they need to have, security measures that Gurdwara should put into place. We talked about red cards, what you should do if ICE comes to the Gurdwara, what you shouldn't do if ICE comes to the Gurdwara. We're probably going to wrap it up pretty quickly, but I'll just let some of my followers and your followers throw in any questions that they have. And if any of you three have anything that you want to add that maybe I didn't touch upon,
Yeah.
this is your opportunity as well.
Yeah, Richard touched on this, and I think you all did with the Sikh Family Central resource. I think it's important for us to recognize that those who might be most vulnerable in our Sangat, including folks who might be survivors of domestic violence, individuals who have mental health concerns, who have health challenges, they might be the most vulnerable, and Gurdwara might be the place that they go to seek safety. And if our Gurdwara are not prepared to direct them to the right resources, they may not know where to go. And so certainly this issue impacts the entire Sangat, right? Everyone at Gurdwara would be impacted by an ICE raid at their Gurdwara. And that includes everything from Beadbi of the Guru Granth Sahib and ICE agents walking in with shoes and uncovered hair and potentially, disrespecting the sanctity of our Gurdwara. It also means folks like my grandmother, who may not speak English, but is a U.S. citizen, could be impacted by this if she's not able to produce documentation that ICE would ask of her. And so I think we need to think even broader beyond just this idea that, oh, well, this only impacts a small percentage of our community, and recognize that that small percentage is just as important as the rest of our Sangat. So those who are undocumented are equally as valuable to our community as everyone else. They have the same inherent value as Sikhs. They have the same inherent value as human beings, and we need to be able to protect them and support them in this moment. And also, this impacts everyone, regardless of your immigration status. We should all be aware of what our rights are, and we should all be aware of what potential damage could be done if there are raids at our Gurdwara, if there are raids at schools, if there are raids at hospitals. These are the places people will go to. There's a reason they were called protected spaces, because those are the spaces that society generally deemed that regardless of who you are, you should have access to your house of worship. Children should have access to school, and those who are in need of healthcare should have access to healthcare. If those places are no longer sacred and protected, then we are all, I think, doing a disservice to not just ourselves, but to our neighbors and our communities as well. So I would urge folks to really think about how important this issue is and how critical it is for our community to step up in this moment for one another.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just one more time, someone is asking if we have heard anything of ICE raids happening. I haven't in the tri-state area, and I don't think you all have nationwide. I haven't heard anything. But, you know, the reason why we decided again to have this conversation in a long form way is because there is the possibility, of course, that this can happen at any time, right? As Harmon mentioned just moments ago, those security measures, they have been rolled back. So that's why we decided to have this conversation. That's why you all have been putting out so many resources. And yeah, we just thought this was a very important conversation to have at this time. That's kind of all I had. I don't see any other questions. Do you want to just let everybody know what resources you have on your website, where they can find it, and then we'll kind of wrap up?
So we have a one-pager summary of what to do, how to interact with ICE. We have a one-pager summary in English and Punjabi. We have a Know Your Rights on immigration generally. That is more geared towards individuals. And then we have a Know Your Rights for Gurdwara. The last two documents are in English, but we're very quickly working to make them available in Punjabi. More information is coming, whether that's posters, whether that's PowerPoint, information in presentation format, absolutely. And I just wanted to make this plug. We've already established that this is changing quickly, but please look at us as partners. We're doing our best, but we're happy to support Gurdwara leadership and folks. If they want to do more in their Sangats, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll do our best to support how you want this information to go out in your Sangat.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Someone is asking if you have any people, any staff members, I would assume, or volunteers in California that can do presentations at Gurdwaras.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Short answer, yes. Short answer, yes. Please email us at immigration@sikhcoalition.org with any such questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, you have the email. Of course, my DMs are open as well. If you want to send me any messages, I'll make sure to send it over. And thank you guys for your time. Thank you everybody who joined us. And like I mentioned, this will be on my Instagram page, I believe on your Instagram page as well. And then I'll be pushing it onto my YouTube channel as well. If there's anything that you wanted to hear a second time or get more clarification on, that will be available to you shortly as well. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Take care.